Uh, Great. So my name is Brielle Pomerantz. I am the Manager of Community Leadership at Go Public Schools West Contra Costa. Before coming to Go, I joined actually in the fall in September. So I've been with Go for about 9 months coming up. And before that, I was a teacher trainer with an ed tech company. And before that, I was about 9 years as an early childhood educator. So lots of time in the classroom. And I'll be facilitating today's session. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our panelists. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight and share your knowledge. So here they are on the screen. And I will let you introduce yourselves. So panelists, if you could each please take a minute to tell us about your work, how it connects to you to our topic today, and how long you've served in the field of education and or literacy instruction. And we'll start with you, Chanmi.
Good evening. My name is Chanmi Chun, and I am currently in Sunnyvale School District, which is a school district that serves students from TK preschool actually to 8th grade. And I serve as the foundational literacy coach. This is my 25th year in education, and I've worked with students in kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. And the first 17 years of my career, I was in Chicago. And then I made the move west to California, and I've been I've had various roles in the classroom, as also being a reading specialist as well in there, and supporting teachers as an induction mentor. I'm excited to be here to learn with you all.
Great, thank you. And John, can you go next?
Sure. My name's John Henry Evans. I am the school librarian at Walter T. Helms Middle School in West Contra Costa Unified. Previously, I was an ELD and an English teacher, and during my entire time in both of those roles, I really felt that the work I was doing was important, but if I could just get students to read, I would be doing the most high leverage thing I could be doing. And so I decided I wanted to shift my work into librarianship, and that's where I've been for the last 2 years.
Great, thank you, John. And Molly.
Hello there. My name is Molly Maloney, and I work at Making Waves Academy, leading our assessments and data and compliance work. But prior to being in that kind of central office role, I worked in elementary schools in the area, first as a teacher, ELA teacher of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and then as a literacy coach, doing instructional coaching with our ELA teachers at my previous school. And so literacy and reading, especially in this age group, is a real passion of mine. I also have 2 of my own middle schoolers at home who are avid readers, and it's very exciting that we get to read a lot of the same books these days and talk about them.
That's great. Thanks, Molly. And Dr. Moore.
I am Dr. Sabrina B. Moore. I previously was a school teacher and then a principal in Oakland. I'm Oakland born and raised, been in education a little over 14 years. And I currently work in two veins. One, I am the founder and executive director of 3L's Literacy, Leadership, and Liberation here in Oakland, California, where we support schools and communities for neighborhood transformation through literacy practices. We provide principal coaching. We provide a literacy hub, which is a structured literacy program that happens during after school hours for any school in the neighborhood that we support. We provide family workshops on weekends, or it depends on the neighborhood. We'll talk a little bit about what it means to listen and respond to the community that you serve. And then we also offer a Tune Up Tuesday space, which is a mastermind space for teachers to do intellectual prep and planning out of curriculum to better understand how to actually support students to read. Both early literacy support, TK to 2nd grade, as well as 3rd to 5th grade students who are learning foundational reading skills as later readers.
Great. Thank you all for being here. We're going to dive into our preset questions. So we know every reader has their own trajectory and timeline of development. However, what are key milestones in literacy development that parents and educators should be aware of and monitor? And I'd love to begin with you, Molly.
Sure. Well, so since we're talking today about, third grade up through middle school and high school, third grade is a really pivotal year in those milestones. So you'll often hear that, third grade is when you transition from that learning to read to reading to learn. And that's an oversimplification for sure, but it shows that, by the end of second grade, the milestones that we're really looking for are that students have really mastered, all of those long vowel sounds, those short vowel sounds, all those like key syllables and building blocks that they'll use in third, fourth, fifth, and older grades to start really putting together a lot of these longer multi-syllable complex words. And so in their classroom, they're going to be spending less and less time learning phonics and being taught, in that direct way, which hopefully they've been getting a lot of in K1 and 2. We know that's sometimes the case, sometimes not. And they'll be asked to be reading in social studies class and science class, and taking on these longer texts. So when I taught third grade, one really kind of informal benchmark I was really looking for milestone with kids there was wanted every third grader by the end of the year to be reading chapter books. And chapter books can mean a lot of different things. There's, some chapter books that are really at the first grade level, those very beginning series, to, some kids reading, Harry Potter or reading these, big long books. But it was a milestone that would show that they're starting to have stamina to read longer things that aren't supported by pictures. And, I really believe that like chapter book series are like the gateway drug for reading, because if you can find that one series that a kid hooks onto, then there's like 30 more books that they can read after that. And it can really spiral from there, based on their interests. But there's obviously many other milestones, but that's one that I always really looked for.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
I think-
Milestones. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Molly really captured it well, because like to simplify it, so that really is that transition from what you want to build from preschool up through second grade is those strong foundational skills. And so when the students then are bridging and able to attend to those longer texts, because they are able to read those multisyllabic words, and actually they start encountering those in first grade. But more regularly. First grade is actually a year where there's so much of the phonics and foundational skills that are being built. It's a very critical year for foundational skills. And then so second grade, then you're continuing on and then reading those like single syllable to multi-syllable words. And that supports knowing how to read those, supports them when they're reading the longer text as well, more fluently, because a lot of the academic words that they're going to encounter as third grade and beyond, because they're going to be encountering more academic texts, are going to include those multisyllabic words. And you'll know your child has those strong foundational skills because if they can decode those academic terms. And of course, we want to continue building for the foundational skills for milestones also is to continue building that knowledge, that vocabulary for students. Because you'll be able to know that your students continue to be a fluent reader, is that also at the same time at that rate, they're also building their academic knowledge, vocabulary as well. And that would really support your students third grade and beyond. And so that is really something that parents should take in consideration if they're the upper elementary up to the middle school and through high school as well.
Great. All right. So the next question is, how do you know when your child is on level? So when should parents become concerned about a child's literacy development? More specifically, if a family feels that their child is not staying on level or more support is needed, what should they do? When and how do they accelerate the process of getting support? And how can a family differentiate between the need to remediate some discrete reading skills or a larger processing issue or learning difference? And Dr. Moore, we'll start with you.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know. Basically,
say,
when do parents need help?
right? I mean, I think that Johnny and Molly kind of spoke to this idea. Your kid is in third grade. They really are at a space where they should be able to read larger words. And they really are at a space where they understand that letters make words, and those words make sentences, and those sentences make paragraphs, and they can, the word decode, basically, they understand the code of reading. So if your student is in the first grade, I'll say when I was a principal, we had a lot of parents whose students were in the second grade and their students weren't reading. And they assumed that that was okay because they're just learning to read. But you just heard them say that first grade is actually they're learning to read larger words. And so if my student is going to the first grade and they're not able to read a book with larger words, I'm a little concerned. And it may be that you've had parent conferences and the teacher has said, they're doing great. They're learning to read. Students progress at different speeds, which is very much true. But there are milestones, like benchmarks that students need to have at first grade, at kindergarten, at second grade. And so not to panic if by first grade they're not reading those largest words and then by second grade, but to be aware of like some of those milestones. How do you know what those milestones are? There are websites where you can type like, what should my child know by kindergarten? Just a Google search on your phone. Siri, what should my child know by the end of kindergarten? What should my child know by the end of first grade? I work in Oakland Unified School District. We have, I'm going to put in the chat, milestone documents any parent can access on our Family Central website. You can, if your child's in third grade, click on third grade, Spanish, Vietnamese, like different languages. So whichever language, home language you have. When you start to have those concerns, there's a space for you to go to the teacher and say, I'm noticing my child is frustrated at home when I try to read a book with them. I'm noticing that they don't want to write as much, or right, because all of that is connected when we talk about literacies. Same thing is true if in first grade your child comes home with a word problem in mathematics, and like they have math, they're struggling to read the problem. I don't know what it's asking. Like all of those are signs to you. I just want to talk to the teacher about whether or not my child is reading at the grade level that they're in. And when they say, well, they don't actually know how to do this or that, you could say, does that mean that they're reading and they're in the second grade reading at a kindergarten level? What should we do? Now we're going to have conversations about different supports that are in place. Does the school have an intervention or an acceleration class for my child to be in? If the school is saying maybe they don't have that support, there are other like layers that you go to after that. Sometimes we go straight to, I want my child to have an individual education plan. That may not be necessary for your student because they are not, they may have had, not to say teachers aren't great, but every teacher doesn't know yet how to teach reading. And so maybe in kindergarten, they had a teacher who was new and they were learning to do a thing. So there's questions to be asked of both your teacher, the school administrator, to say to them, we spoke to the teacher, I'm really having questions about the frustration. Are my child not able to do a thing that's on the milestone document? I'm wondering what support you have. And then from there, it is, I talk to the administration. Now I want to see about, they put some systems in place. We wait for 9 weeks to see whether or not those systems actually lead to an improved outcome. If after 9 to 12 weeks, you aren't seeing any shift or change, or they're not able to speak to what your child now knows differently, then there's another conversation to be had. But all that to say, you start with checking with your child. And if you read, sometimes we have families who you read at home in Spanish, your home love language is Spanish, read to your child in Spanish. There's no, like literacy is literacy. It is to see whether or not they're comfortable with it. They get excited about reading to you. They get excited, right? And so like, there's something about your child's happiness around reading that also is an indicator of whether or not they're having the success that they want to have in reading at school. And then that's a conversation with the teacher also.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in with some thoughts?
I just want to jump in and say, first of all, Dr. Moore, thank you for pointing out to wait until the remediation plan has had time to work, because I think it can be a little tempting to go, I'm not seeing an improvement right away. We got to try something different, but actually things take time. And I just want to say from a secondary level, I think it's important when thinking about when a parent or guardian knows that their child needs help, to recognize that when we get into secondary level, it's really about comprehension. So it's not just, can my student read what's on the page? It's, can they then tell me about it afterwards? And I think the best thing you can do is to ask them about what they're reading. And if you find they're not able to summarize something, even if they just read it, that's kind of a clue that maybe they learned fluency, but they didn't learn comprehension. And so they need a little bit more support there.
Great. That leads us to our next question, which was to you. So shifting to those middle school and high school students, if a student is struggling at that level, sort of in that secondary piece, what are remedial supports that can be put in place and what might that look like?
Sure. So the biggest thing is kind of what I mentioned, which is that shift into comprehension and kind of what Molly was saying, or sorry, Molly was saying about reading to learn versus learning to read, right? By the time they get to secondary level, we're really looking at them being able to read to learn. And so the stuff that's going to be talked about in class is not so much how do you read, it's more we expect that you already know how to read. Now, can you do something with that? Can you analyze and process that information? And so I don't know if I have specific supports that I would suggest, because it really depends on what the teacher is having students learn in class, what their learning objectives are. But a few kind of generic ones would be graphic organizers, having your students be able to take notes or organize their thoughts and to what they're reading. One thing I do is I give out bookmarks at school, and it's, can you see? Yes, you can. So there's this side, but then is this backwards for y'all? It's backwards for me.
No,
Okay, good. So this is like just like a little platitude on the front, but on the back there's actual like reading. Wow, it would be great if this thing weren't disappearing. But there's actual like reading methods in there. Equipping your student with questions to ask themselves as they're reading. And I think especially being able to set up reading with intent, right? Before a student begins a chapter, if their teacher can tell them, as you're reading, this is what I want you to look for. That's going to be really, really helpful, because that's useful for monitoring. I think monitoring is a reading skill that students really, really need, is to be able to read and then catch themselves if they've missed something and know, okay, do I need to reread this, or am I probably going to pick it up later in the chapter? If they can master that, then that goes a long way. And then the last thing I want to suggest, I'm a huge, huge proponent of audiobooks. If the student is having trouble accessing the text in print form, maybe play the audiobook. If you can get them to do it, even having them listen to the audiobook while they're reading, a lot of times it can make all the difference in the world, because if they're more of an auditory processor than a visual processor, you might find that all of a sudden the story makes sense to them. So those are my recommendations.
That's a great recommendation, and I love audiobooks, so yes.
I want to just add to that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yeah.
because we still, right, we still want our students to learn though for that foundational skills. If and when they get to middle school and high school, they are still reading like a robot, like very much like the prosody isn't there, the actual like intonation and all those pieces don't exist. It is because they have some unfinished learning in some of those foundational skills. And so mom, dad, auntie, uncle, granny, go to the school and say, we want to work on comprehension, but we also want to fill in for that unfinished learning that has occurred. And so what's the acceleration support that my child will get? What is the intervention that my child will get? And not to pull them out of core in order to learn the code. So like, it's not the code or core, it is both, so that they're both learning for the foundational skills, as well as the content that they should be engrossed in as a 5th grader, 6th grader, 7th grader, 9th grader, 12th grader. Part of the comprehension piece is the background knowledge. Do they understand all of the things that are happening in the text? And some of that comes with reading over the years, what I learned in 2nd grade, what I learned in, so that they may not have those skills then. And so they have those gaps in vocabulary and background knowledge. So maybe I'm asking the teacher, could you give us the vocabulary a week in advance, so my child and I, or my child, can know those vocabulary words to help with this particular chapter in the book, right? Some strategies to support my learner to help them to get the vocabulary they need, as well as the background knowledge. Can you tell me some other texts that may be at a different level that my child would read to better understand the background of a particular text, so they're comprehending with the vocabulary and the background information?
Yeah, I saw a really great flow chart recently, and it was basically like middle and high school, like, kid having a comprehension issue. And like start with first, are they reading fluently? And if they are reading fluently, then you're going to go into the comprehension. And it's exactly, that background knowledge, that vocabulary, and that like monitoring, right? Which I think is the most important strategy there. But then if they're not, you're going to look at their fluency and see, well, do they have their phonics and those foundational skills? If not, even in middle and high school, we want to go back and filling those in. But often they'll have those, they can read the words, but it's that halting, it's the fluency that's like a missing piece. And I feel like increasingly, like I've seen, over the years of COVID, and I think one of the things that happened over distance learning is that fluency piece, at least for a lot of the middle schoolers who I see, has really dropped out. And they're just reading much more slowly than I would have seen even just a few years ago, which then if your brain takes you 2 minutes to get through these 3 sentences, your brain doesn't have any room to be like thinking about like, what's happening here, what's going on, because minutes have gone by before you get to the end of that paragraph. You forget what happened in the beginning of it, and you're spending all your mental power just like reading every word. And so, doing that repeated reading with kids to build up that fluency, so then they have more brain space for the comprehension, I think can make a huge difference, and is, of the different interventions out there, like a relatively like low lift intervention, one that we can work on at home and at school, I think.
I wanted to add though that like the priorities, because there's three aspects of fluency that people often think about expression, but that's actually not as high of a priority. Like accuracy is number one. You actually want to build for accuracy first before you talk about rate, and then expression, because then that's the gateway open for full comprehension if they have that full accuracy. And that's the window down into, do they have their foundational skills? Do they have those, phonics skills, those decoding skills? The accuracy part is, when we're talking about those decoding skills, is that whenever we talk about intervention for older students, one of the key things that keep coming research after research is that it's still at the word level. Yeah. So there's still an indication that there's still something where the students are not understanding how to decode the text. And so as much as you focus on comprehension, I'm not saying this is not that's the goal of all these things, foundational skills with phonics, and then building with fluency, that's all going to, your kid's going to comprehend. And so, and building vocabulary and background knowledge as well. But if they don't have that word level, that's where you're having those students that are in remediation plans year after year after year, starting in 2nd grade, and they just don't leave. And then I love how Dr. Moore had mentioned, then you just keep having the kids who miss the core because they're still, they're not even being taught the code in these remediation classes. And so it's like, then they don't get the core and they don't even get the code. And so that's something that as parents, you should be advocating for if your school system does not provide that for your child. Because as much as the teacher has these scaffolds to differentiate for your child, the school has to have a system in place that especially for middle school and high school, because the way that the schedule is created for periods and things like that, it needs to be built in that your language arts teacher has something else where they can build in time to do some small group work that could be supporting your child for specific skills that that with that unfinished learning that your child needs. And it's not, and I know this goes into probably my question. So Brielle, you might want to just read my question. And I'm going to like get a little fired up with this.
Sure.
Go ahead and read my question because it's about this. So
exactly, it's a perfect segue. So the question is, what is the responsibility of schools in literacy remediation, and what is the role of families at home? So exactly what you're saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to go right to, in terms of like, it is my belief as an educator that it's the fundamental right for students to learn how to read in school. And it is our responsibility as teachers and schools to teach our students how to read. And so you as parents here that are here, please understand that it should not be on your shoulders. Your primary role is to be your child's advocate. And especially for those of you who have middle schoolers and high schoolers, you're then teaching your child how to advocate for themselves. because they are navigating a system where maybe the system hadn't been working for them. And so we are in our education world, like really rethinking how we need to shift how we teach foundational skills in K-2 first, and that to support our learners. And the shift, unfortunately, is going to be a little slow, but I think parents, your voice is what makes the change. If you say, my child is not getting what they need to learn how to read, these are some milestones, my third grader plus. So if you have a third grade, fourth and up, and they're not able to read fluently, and they're not able to attend to that text, that's an indication, whether or not they've been in remediation or not. And one thing that you should understand, that when the question of, is your child on level, it might not, like there are so many students who think it's their fault that they cannot read. Let's just rest with that. It is not your child's fault that they have not been taught to read. And so we just want to make sure that that the instructional materials and the teaching in place in the districts in the schools that your child is in really is providing that correct instruction. So in terms of then the responsibility of the remedial intervention in schools, is what we should say, is that it actually happens in the classroom. So the classroom teacher has two responsibilities: to teach the whole class, but also to support in small groups. And so this is why, they keep saying that, public school teachers are glorified babysitters, but we do a lot to support your kids, and teaching a kid how to read is really, really hard. It's complex. And I'm training teachers how to do this, and it's still not easy. I have a whole master's degree plus life of learning on how to do this, and it's not easy. So please don't feel like you have to, like I said, keep being the advocate for your child, because this can happen in schools. And administrators like Dr. Moore are fighting to create these systems so they exist for you and your family, because that's what they deserve. And then we have partnerships with wonderful people like librarians to bring the love of reading. And so what you can do at home is that, like what Dr. Moore had said about, like, the school should be able to keep your child in core, and then have what we call in the education world, we call it double dosing. And so your child still has access to grade level curriculum. No one should ever tell you, whether your child has an IEP or not, that they cannot have access to your grade level curriculum, because their brains are continuing to grow. Just because they still may need to learn how to crack the code. Learning to read is not a grade level. There are 90-year-old folks, and I have wonderful stories I can share with you. A lovely picture book that I just read in a second grade classroom last year of a 90-year-old woman who decided, I'm going to learn how to read now. And she did. So you are not limited to learn how to read. And that's what you can tell your child, is that we will get you there. And so your child just needs you to be like their support, and to continue to have rich, authentic opportunities to read at home, and exposure to great texts. Give them choice. If they want to listen to the book, listen to the book. If they want to watch the movie version of it, watch the movie version first and then read the book. If they want to just read that graphic novel, let them read the graphic novel. So these are the things that students in radiation, they're just kind of told that, like, oh, don't do these things. We need to, and we don't want to already make reading that much more laborious for them and not fun, because motivation is another key aspect of supporting students, older readers who need intervention, is that they need to feel motivated to read. And Dr. Anita Archer, in talking about fluency, was that one aspect is not just the rate, not just the accuracy, but it's to be able to motivate a child. If a child's not motivated to read, they're embarrassed to read out loud, they're not going to practice. They're not going to practice. And so I have a child with anxiety. She's a great reader, but she just doesn't want to do it in front of people. She can read. And so it's going to look like she does it. And so you just have to build their confidence. Just do it in front of me, honey. That's what you need to encourage them to be, is that you're going to be their number one advocate, and then teach them to say, hey, and my own children hate this when I say this, but they're like, you need to tell your teacher. I'm not telling your teacher. You need to tell your teacher that this is what you need. And that's what we can do as, parents of children who are becoming young adults, is that we help support them to say, like, what would you do? And how can you stand up for what you need? And so that's what you can do as parents. And I hope that you continue to do to advocate for them. And please ask questions, because the world of education, there is still a lot of things to understand, and there's things to crack in terms of the system. and ask them, what is the system in place to support my kid to read? And continue to fight for that, because that is our job as in the schools to do that for you.
Great. Thank you.
That was a mic drop moment.
Yeah. We love the passion. We do. A lot of passionate voices on this call, and I love it. So we're going to shift a little bit to our English language learners. So many families on today's call might have a home language other than English. What are your thoughts on the strategies families use when developing literacy skills at home in a language other than English? And John, we're going to start with you as a former ELD teacher and department lead.
Thank you. So the thing I really want to be clear about here is there is a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of, I should say there's some confusion sometimes from parents for whom English is not their first language, about whether or not we should be speaking English at home, right? If my child is learning English, should we be speaking English at home so they get as much practice as possible? And the research is very clear that the answer is no. And the reason for that is if both you and your child are communicating in your second language, you're not going to be hitting on the higher level concepts that need review at home. So the best thing you can do is to talk to your student about what's going on at school, talk to them about what they're reading, and let them do it in the language that is comfortable for them. Because if they're trying to both strain themselves to learn English and hit those comprehension skills, then that's just double the work. And a lot of times they're not going to reach the point that they need to. Also, something that research points out, and I believe Dr. Moore mentioned this, is reading in your first language, right? If your first language is, Spanish or Vietnamese or Portuguese, whatever your first language is, research that I've been told about anyways, definitely does say that literacy skills are built up from reading in your first language. So your student doesn't have to strain themselves to read in English if it's not their first language. They can read in their native language or their dominant language, and be building those literacy skills as well. So those are the two big strategies I really wanted to bring up. And I think to go along with that, I would point out that as an ELD teacher, I think one thing that we tried to communicate as much as possible was we're really not trying to teach our students to be English speakers. We're trying to teach them to be bilingual. And so one thing that makes me very, very sad is when you've got a student who lost whatever their native language was because they strained so hard to learn English, because they just lost probably one of the most valuable skills they could gain in their lives. And and I think even more unfortunately, a lot of times it does kind of put some strain on the relationship between student and parent if they can't communicate in the same language anymore. So just remember that the goal is bilingualism, and keep using that native language as a strength.
Any other thoughts before we?
One thing I could
Yeah.
to kind of build on all of
Yeah.
that is and thinking about the framework we have from Tami around the right to read and like your role as an advocate as a parent. You think about in school, our emerging bilingual students, have the right to be taught how to decode those words in English and unlock all of that phonics, and how to get ELD, how to understand like the code of English specifically and those complex sentences and that language development. And sometimes they get one without the other. So either ELD just becomes like another reading class and it's doing the exact same thing they're going to do in their ELA class and not attending to like the specific thing that they need for learning, like just the specificities of complex English language, or they're not really getting those foundational phonics skills because it's just assumed to be like an ELD issue, right? And it's like, oh, it's because they're in EL. and the some of those foundational things that all of our readers need get kind of written off as part of the issue there. And so making sure that we're giving our students and demanding our students get really robust foundational reading skills and really robust English language development to learn how to like both decode reading and just decode like the grammatical side of it as well.
Great. Thank you.
And so in terms of language development, is that most languages, I don't know if I actually know of any that don't start with sound. And so that is one of the key things in your child's literacy development and foundational skills, that they should be attending to sound first, not letters. If it's letters first, then they should be questioning that. And so no matter what language it is, whether it's Spanish or Chinese or Korean, is that starts in Korean. That's the expertise I have in a non alphabetic language. Like it's sound first. So then if some people think that, oh no, I'm going to not speak English. I'm not going to speak in my first language at home because I don't want my child to be confused. Actually, you're developing your child's understanding of how to crack the English language because you are continuing to speak in your first language. And so if it's easier if you do speak languages that are like Spanish, actually, so there's, I forgot, 20 some letters in Spanish, but there's only 22 sounds in Spanish. So they're very easy to be able to translate. The letter sound matches sort of with but in English, there's 44 sounds. So there's very interesting rules in terms of how it can be cracked, but it's just, there's different rules. And so even in another language like Korean is actually really phonetic. And so if you know the sound in Korean, then you can just figure out, oh, that's the letter that matches it. This is the letter that connects with that. So it's really cracking that code, but also having that full development in your native language, your first language. But I know that a lot of our students are not necessarily reading in their first language. They're just being able to be oral, like they can speak to their parents and hear what their parents say, but they may not read or write it. So that's going to be a lot of our students, but that oral language development that you continue to have. And so even if you feel my parents never felt confident in their English compared to, speaking Korean, but just whatever in terms of just keep having those conversations with your child. That transference will happen because you are supporting that sound language, and hopefully then the instruction in school will be able to connect that. And especially in languages like Spanish, where you have cognates, there's a lot of words that are very similar spelled in Spanish and English, but then they're just pronounced differently. And so it's just a quick transfer from that language as they develop their understanding of how English works.
I will add just one more layer to it, is that the research that has been around for a very long time, but also is coming back out around African American English, and this idea that some African American students, some Black students, some Black homes speak African American English, and it's different, right? And so we are going into schools and we are learning academic English, which is different letters, different sounds. And so there's a space for Black mamas and Black families to fully understand that your child is also learning a new language or learning a new sounds, completing a word. So there's a really great need for Black families who are noticing that their students may not be mastering the letter sounds to have your child start to do more writing, right? Like we call it inventive spelling. They'll write the words how they hear it, and we can say to them, oh, look how great you've done that. That actually is the way you heard it. And so let me show you how it's written in academic English. And so they can start to see the transference and see that maybe you dropped off a T or you dropped off the ending sound. And so start making those sounds and making those connections. So it's not just learning multiple languages that aren't English, but learning multiple versions of English that is present in schools. And why I would say, just based on research that I've just really been diving into lately, has been a challenge for our Black students that we all need to start to recognize and pay attention to.
I know I've already finished speaking, but Dr. Moore, your answer just brought up something for me, which is that ELD standards in recent years have actually changed to include both African American Vernacular English and Chicano English as being subjects that students should explore, right? And to recognize them as valid languages. I mean, they have some pretty strict grammatical structures. that are just different from academic English, right? So there's a lot of I guess I should say there has been some talk among ELD teachers about like shifting away from, this is the wrong way and this is the right way to this is just a different version. This is a different version of English than the one we're learning in class. And so I do think it is very important to recognize that, and the ELD standards agree.
Such great answers. Thank you. Shifting to something similar, but a little different. So we have a lot of dual immersion or dual language programs out there. Is there a timeline of literacy development different for students enrolled in dual immersion programs? Are there specific strategies to support our dual immersion or dual language students on their path to ELA proficiency? And that's just open to anyone. I have thoughts on that piece of it.
We, from my limited understanding of our dual immersion program, because by proxy of the coach that's been there for a while, is that the milestones should be like similar. And so it's just now the percentage of what the core instruction will be in the language so we have Spanish dual immersion in one of our sites, and so it's primarily Spanish instruction 90-10, and then it shifts over, and then eventually it's like 50-50 as they go out to 4th and 5th grade, and then it moves up. And so just because they're learning 2 languages at once, it's the difference now than some now this is getting a little academic, but there's in terms of language, there's something called BICS and CALPS, meaning like the social language, and then there's the academic language. And so what these dual immersion programs are doing is ensuring that the students develop that academic language. And so I could say I have a very like playground level of how to speak Korean, at probably about a 1st grade level that will get me like survival. But then in terms of academic, don't ask me anything academic. I would not be able to have that conversation with you. And so that's something to keep in mind in terms of like those as far as my limited understanding is that the milestone should not differ just because you're learning 2 languages at once. It's just now the purpose of the dual immersion has just different priorities in terms of like when they learn the different languages.
Great. Thank you. During the school year, what a student reads is often dictated by curriculum. We talked about some very, academic texts can happen. What might qualify as quality reading material that children seek out on their own or students seek out on their own? Does genre matter? And along those same lines, how can families and educators entice a reluctant reader? And what are maybe some strategies to increase excitement and engagement around literacy? How do we make it exciting? And John, we'll start with you, but again, anyone can chime in. Go ahead.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing that it's so important to understand that I think even a lot of teachers misunderstand, in my experience, is that there is a big difference between instructional reading and independent reading. The texts that are dictated by the curriculum that students are reading in class, those are going to tend to be higher grade level, more complex books. But the reason that we choose those for our students is that the teacher can support them in reaching those higher levels of comprehension. Independent reading, what we really want to focus on that can be encouraged, but I don't think can be really taught, is a love of reading. That's what we want to get at with independent reading. And it's just so important that we understand that. So when we talk about what qualifies as quality reading material, it can be tempting to think, well, the harder books, right? We want our students to read the higher grade level books. But number one, grade level is highly misleading. Even the people who invented the systems have kind of said that. Recently looked it up the other day, and Diary of a Wimpy Kid is, I believe, a higher grade level than Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Yeah, it's very misleading. The quality that you want your students to be guided towards is the kind of book that they are going to want to read, the kind of book that they don't want to put down. and that makes them want to turn the page. As an ELD teacher, I was taught, the questions we should be asking are like, can you tell me what you think is going to happen to the next character? Are you excited to read the next chapter? If they're really into what they're reading, that is the right book. And does genre matter? I would say there's not any one particular genre that is like a good genre. If you can encourage your student to read a variety of genres, it's probably going to be a little bit better, so they're not surprised when they come across a new one, but in general, anything that holds their interest is really great. I think my favorite example of this was during we have Reading Zone at our school, which is basically our version of SSR, and there was one student who he picked a different book every time, and I could tell he was never engaged. And I went up to him one day and I was like, "Can you tell me what this book's about?" And he said, "No." I said, "Is it because you're not reading it?" He said, "That's right." And I said, "Okay, well, what kind of books are you into?" "Oh, well, I don't read." "Okay, well, what kind of TV shows do you watch?" "Well, I watch a lot of anime." And I just kind of like facepalmed because I was like, "I wish that you had told me this earlier." And then I just went and got the stack of manga from my cabinet. And from then on, he never had a problem reading during Reading Zone. He actually started asking me to buy him the next books in the series. If it gets them excited about reading, you can think of reading kind of like a workout, right? If you're lifting weights, this is probably not the most important action in your life, but doing that action over and over again builds up those muscles in the same way that the practice of reading builds up students' reading stamina, reading strategies, reading skills that will apply even when they're reading a higher level text.
And I actually was a teacher librarian at one point in my career as well. So that was actually one of my favorite aspects of my career. And I actually loved it because I got to be a book matchmaker. And what you were talking about, John, is that it's the conversations you have. So educators as well as parents should be asking their kids, what do you love? What do you like to read? What do you like to watch? What do you, if it's sports, get them to the sports page and look at the statistics. And, you might have a future business kid, so go to the economics section and get them hooked, like especially our listeners, with a podcast or an audiobook. I mean, we are in the car a lot these days. And so, or like whether you're just going back and forth, stick in a cool podcast, because some audiobooks have some really great readers. I'm going to just tell you, some of them I enjoy listening to it versus just reading it. Because the reader just captures the voice, or can pronounce certain, because I like reading a lot of diverse texts, and so can pronounce words I wouldn't know how to be able to pronounce certain names and things like that. And they just have just a great calming or just engaging way of getting into the story. But authentic text is a critical component to your child's curriculum at school. They should not just be getting decodable texts or those sort of things. That should be part of the dictated curriculum, and your child should be able to have choice. So that's why when they, especially for third grade up, when they do things like book clubs or literature circles, sometimes the teacher will just have one book that everyone is studying and you learn together, but it should be integrated where the students should be able to study and apply what they're learning when they're reading to learn now, and they're analyzing and doing it by having choice. And it's not a book that's necessarily at their, meaning it should be their age appropriate level. And so it should be things that are high quality, that are culture responsive, and they represent who they are. So they should see themselves in those texts, and they should be current texts or just diverse experiences, where then it becomes a mirror, window, and a sliding glass door. That's a phrase that we say with texts, where the students should either feel that they see themselves in these texts, or they learn from someone else's experience that they kind of can connect to, because of the human experiences of unrequited love, and all of those things are all things that we can all cross time and across globe and things like that we can all understand. And so those are the things that you should be advocating in the classroom as well as at home. But those reluctant readers, I think John mentioned earlier, having that scaffold, then if that text is being used in school, where they just have audio support. And that's not just for some kids, there's research saying that audiobooks develop comprehension just as much as you're reading it. And so there, that is not something where it's like a assisted technology that just gets the kids to do it. That still supports your child's comprehension, because their oral comprehension, their listening comprehension is just as important as their visual comprehension as well. And so if you want some suggestions of podcasts or audiobooks that have got us hooked at home with my teenagers and my preteens, and we can share that with you all too.
Great. Any other thoughts on that before we shift a little bit? Okay. So we are at the crossroads. It's nearing the end of the school year. So as we prepare for summer, what are important questions that you can ask your child's current teacher to gauge what their literacy level or where they're at, both reading and comprehension skills? And for the reading assessments that are done in school, iReady or STAR testing, or whatever testing is done, an assessment is done in the school, how can the family use that information to drive their summer strategy? And we can, let's start with Molly, and then again, open up to anyone else.
All right, so one of the things you mentioned, a lot of things in that question there, but one was, those benchmark assessments that they're doing at school. Some schools are using iReady, some using STAR, maybe MAP, depending on where you're at. And one is ask for those scores. A lot of times kids are taking tests at school and spending a lot of hours on them, and that doesn't always get home to parents or students to see how they did. All of these make beautiful score reports that can be printed out and shared with you, or shared with you on PowerSchool, or any of these different platforms. And you have the right to know how your kids did on these assessments. And unlike SBAC and things like that, it takes a while for the state to give the scores back to any of us. These other, the ones that we do in-house, those scores are ready pretty much right away. And so if you haven't gotten your scores, you can ask for them, ask your teacher. And those tests, like STAR and iReady, which you mentioned, those are both, growth assessments. So there's gonna be two different things that you can look for on those. One is they're gonna give you some kind of estimation of where your kid is based on grade level norms, right? It's gonna say they're at early 4th grade or late 7th grade, or some kind of number like that. That is what those test, creators, those test publishers are saying is where the average student in their samples is at the end of 4th grade or the middle of 7th grade or whatever. And so we call those achievement scores. And you can use those as kind of looking at those milestones as a way of taking all that assessment data and saying where they seem to be fitting on those milestones. And that gives you a sense of, is that above or below where the kind of average normative kid in the middle of, all the kids in America is on there. And it's also going to give you a growth score. So that's one of the nice things that they took at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. And it might say they're a little bit below grade level, or not quite at grade level yet, or it might say they're way above grade level, but how much have they grown over the course of these last 9 months? And did they start off at grade level, but they're still at the exact same spot and they haven't grown much? Did they start off below grade level and they're still below grade level, but they're way closer than they used to be? And did they make their average amount of growth? Did they make their stretch goal, which we can see on iReady as well? And really trying to look at both of those, because they both really give us good information. We want to see our kids growing, we all want our kids to grow, and we want to compare that to where we ultimately want them to be, so that they'll be prepared for college, ultimately at the end of all these 12 years there. So I would just be looking out for both of those. Now, how that's going to translate into your summer plans is, tricky, right? Because you're going into summer, it's not your job to be your kid's teacher over the summer and to make up for everything that's been lost necessarily along the way. Where you're at, I still probably, for any of these, getting books into your kids' hands in the summer is one of the number one things that I think we can do as parents. And, all of those things that the previous panels were saying, books that they're going to want to read, books that are interesting, books that are engaging. Great readers read books above and below their level all the time. We as adults, if we're readers, read books above and below our levels all the time. I don't stick to only reading things at my, college level, and that's the same with our kids. So, taking things in the summer, I would say, we've got great libraries here in Richmond and San Pablo. There's like one where librarians can help hook them up, or going to Barnes and Noble or Amazon or wherever, like wherever's your path there. And also we were talking about, building background knowledge, right? Is one of those important things for comprehension. And that's one of the great opportunities in summer. It's our opportunity to, go to a library, go camping, go somewhere different, go all over California and just build that background knowledge, which is going to help them, even if they don't even have a book for that entire summer. If they're learning about the world, they're going to be a stronger reader when they have to read about those things later on in school.
Great. Thank you. In that vein, if you are helping a family, and you sort of touched on this, build their summer plan, what resources and tools might be the most effective to support reading development throughout the summer? And what strategies might create the most significant gains if time is limited over the summer? As you said, they're busy, they're camped, they're doing sports, they're doing whatever. And I would love to hear from Dr. Moore what your thoughts are first.
I will say, I like sometimes students and families are like, well, summer school is kind of going to be a headache and not a thing I want to do. But there are millions of dollars given to expanded learning right now. And so summer school is a great option. A lot of summer schools have a literacy focus. It's free. They're going to eat great food, healthy food in the school, right? So consider it. It's 19 days. It's a very short window of time to get some extra practice. Also, we spoke about earlier, just this idea of fluency. And just reading books that you love to read, and then the accuracy piece, right? And so what would it mean to grab a few books from your school before you leave, right off the shelf? Ask your teacher, can you borrow them? I'm sure no teacher's going to say, no, you can't take books home. And read those books. Even if you read the same books over and over again, practice your fluency, practice every day. So parents, families, I would say, I want to hear you read. I want to hear you read in the other room. I want to hear you just every day for some amount of time, just to be reading as much practice as we can get. Regarding the question around end of the year, you've gotten your report card, you didn't get another parent conference because we usually do those in March. And so you didn't get the end of the year scores until this report card. There's a space for you, grab that report card and say to the teacher, I just really want to talk to you about any particular skill, right? Some teachers are like, I'm ready to go. I know I'm tired. I remember teaching 4th grade, but I don't know any teacher that's going to be like, no, I can't tell you the 3 things I want your baby to work on in the summer. I just want to know 3 things or 2 things, or right. But it is the practice. As much as we can get our students to do some reading, and I don't care what book it is, read to your little sister or brother, read to the cat, read, just practice, just as much practice as possible.
And I just thank you for saying that it's just reading, because I'm going to just tell you, our teenagers just love it when we teach our kids at home. No, they don't even want to listen to us when we say, put away your dishes. Okay. So they're not going to be like, yeah, mom, teach me how to read this summer. Sorry, parents. I know that this is reality. And I mean, I'm a teacher and I tell my children, I've actually taught teachers how to do this. And they're like, no, mom, you're still wrong. So being that your job is in the summer is to just get them excited about reading and with experiences, building that background knowledge. So one thing that I feel really blessed, continue to have an educator summer, is that although we don't have summers off, we don't get paid in the summer, but I covet the time I have with my children because it's all about experiences. I don't actually need to put them in too many camps because I go out, I explore the city, I do experience. So then they're building their knowledge just through experiences as well, going to free things. I'm all about free museums, going to the library and giving them that choice. And then just some fun things that they want to do with their friends. So encourage them to do book clubs, have movie nights where it's the book version of the movie, movies based on books, and have them do a summer book club with a series of books where you say, you choose this, let's do a comparison of Clueless. How is this Jane Austen's Emma? How is 10 things, all these 90s movies that are coming back. bring that in, bring that culture in. And the current, there's the half of it, I think, is also based on Cyrano de Bergerac. So our high school students can get, familiarity with these classics that they may encounter through these movies that are currently, out there now. But make it fun for them. And actually, during the pandemic, my kids can read. Feel blessed that they didn't have reading show. But during the pandemic, I read through the whole Harry Potter series with them. Like I read to them. And they were old enough and to read, but I still read with them. And so if you happen to have that time, and I have some like a cute story where this daughter, the dad read to her even up through high school, because that's just something that they have a little time together. And it's just like a little bit before bedtime, and they just made it a routine. And I know that we covet our time that we have left with our children before they leave off. Sometimes we're like, just want to go to bed, leave me alone so I can watch my own Netflix. But it just, that bonding experience that you can have, you can even read with your child that's older, because anything you can do, play games with them, that's also reading too. And so, and strategizing and building that connection with your child. So it does not have to be straight up academic, but please use resources like Dr. Moore had said in your school district. If there is summer school, let the school teach your kids that for those 20 days, and then make it your job where you're the fun parent, because you want to continue building that like fun experience for your kids. Fun meaning, like, I know adult fun is never fun for the kids, but I'm just saying that keeping them motivated, and then just like, wow, you're giving me choice. And one thing, if you wanted to give them a sheltered choice, because what Molly was talking about, like if you do happen to know their Lexile level, your child is not a Lexile level, but you can be like, hey, I do have one goal. Like choose whatever books, but then I want you to have this one challenge book I want you to try. You pick this, give them a suite of options and say, here, pick something from here, make this a challenge book, and we'll have like some incentive at the end where we can try it. If you wanted to really push them to try something, but if it doesn't work, don't do it. I mean, just as like an offering, but really take your child's lead, because we still want them to encounter reading as an experience that's positive, and that's what you can do as an advocate for your child.
I want to jump in here because I have to point out a very, very, very valuable resource, which is your local library summer reading program. Please, please, please do yourself a favor, sign your student up for it. And in most public libraries, it's actually all ages. I signed myself up for the summer reading program last year and got a very cool tote bag from the San Francisco Public Library. Back when I was young, it was like read a book, write a book report, turn that in, and then it was a lot. Now, almost every public library uses an app called Beanstack because it's free for public libraries. So download it on your phone. It literally is just, you start it, it's a reading timer. And then when you're done, you hit stop, and then that's it. And then it tracks your minutes. And if you read enough minutes, then you complete the challenge. So it's a great way of incentivizing. You earn badges as you're reading. And I did check all of the districts that you mentioned, Brielle, and it's all the same reading program they're all offering the same reading program. So please make sure that you do sign up for it. And the other thing that I don't think was mentioned is make sure to check with your school district to see if they are offering ebooks, an ebook platform, because those will be available during the summer, I think, for most schools. In our district, we offer Sora, which is Overdrive's, and I think a lot of districts use that one as well. So audiobooks and ebooks are available through there, so all through the summer. So if you have trouble getting to the library for whatever reason, that's another great way to have continued access.
Right, and that your child should, a lot of public schools have partnerships with their local libraries. So they should they might actually, for middle school and up, be given a public school card already through the school district. So you may want to, if you haven't gone to the library to get one, and you can just apply online. You don't even need to go into the library. You actually never need to step foot in the library now with these, because what John had mentioned with the Sora app, there's a free one, and your kids are on your devices, so they can download the Libby app as well. And the Libby app also gives you, it's free, and you can check out books with the library card that you signed up with, either through your school district or online, and then you can and you could do several libraries. Like you could actually get like library cards in different areas, even if you're not a resident there. And I do that sometimes just so I can get access to books. And so you can do that. And the ebooks is, I mean, if that's what's really nice about the ebooks is sometimes there's options for like, I don't know what this word means, and I can tap on this and it'll tell me what the word means. So there's a lot of options there too with the ebooks.
Great. Well, that is the end of our preset questions. I do want to touch on just a few resources to share that we've already put in the chat. So here at Go Public Schools, we recently released a parent's guide to special education. So if you or your child teacher sees that your child is struggling and might need additional support or intervention, and you want to learn more about the individualized education programs or IEPs that were mentioned earlier, navigating the special education world, and we have this resource for you. A portion of it, while a portion of this guide was tailored specifically for schools in West Contra Costa regarding resources, the bulk of it focuses on California state level special education laws, guidelines, and rights. And that is in the chat as well. And then before we get to some of our questions, I know we're running low on time, but we will get to them. I want to share that again, some resources that support your efforts for this summer. And I think this was mentioned in the chat as well. Oakland Reads offers 2 ways to explore their site. First, you can look at the reading skills overview page to learn how reading works and the different skills that the children need to develop to become successful readers. And second, you can explore that age grade level milestones page. So I know there are a bunch of milestones pages that were shared in the chat, but this is another way to go about that, to learn more about the milestones are and how you can support them. And then we've also created a 1-pager to connect you to a handful of additional resources. And those links are also in the chat. So I just want to touch on those amazing things that we want to share. I know there's been a lot in the chat as well. So thank you all for providing those. I think we will be emailing out when we share our sort of recap. We'll share a lot of those links. So a few questions that came in. Let's see here. One is from an audience member. My child is 13 years old and going into 8th grade this fall. I have the hardest time getting her to read any book. She will do it eventually, but is really slowly over weeks or months. I've also noticed she has a difficult time with math or science word problems, and her English class grades are average. How can I know what level she is really at so I can help her this summer? I want to address any gaps that may exist. Any thoughts?
In terms of knowing where she's actually at, there is something called an oral reading fluency assessment that I could give. I mean, it's not something that the parent can administer that. It's just knowing the accuracy of how much your child can read in a minute. The one thing I would advocate though is that the school is providing you with some information on that instead of you taking on that responsibility. So I'm just giving you that, and if you don't have that option, that it's a really easy thing that a parent can do to check like where they're at in their reading level compared to where their peers are, because it tells you your child would read a 7th grade passage and then be able to say like where they fall in terms of being able to read. And actually 50% is at grade level. But in terms of your child, I mean, even though my child knew how to read, it wasn't until like she had some friends that suggested books to her. Honestly, like if you can employ like another caring, loving adult, it like sometimes it can't come from you. Even though I'm like I'm a bibliophile, I can tell you lots of book writing. My child really, and now she's kind of gotten to a point where she's like, "Hey, mom, what do you have? What do you know? Like, what could I read together?" And we were enjoying reading some books together. But when she was like that hurdle of like and not finding anything I really am motivated to read. Honestly, sometimes it's like a connection with like seeing themselves in a text. So I don't know what your child's likes or their personalities and things like that. But once my child felt visible in the text, like she felt like more curious about reading about like a person that looks like me, or a person that has like similar like interests like me, and is like a character's more like me. And that was one way to get my child into it. But really, then if your child is into fantasy or things like that, maybe still finding characters that are like that they kind of like are inclined to, like if they're into Marvel, maybe some hero things or whatnot. So that's one way, is that like the more your child reads actually is actually going to dictate their comprehension level, like increase their comprehension level. So this is why we're saying get the books in your child's hands, because there isn't going to be, like, I don't think you need to do word attack skills with her and like, you know, decoding for math. Like if you just can get your child to like kind of be interested in reading again, and then just doing at her pace, and then hopefully getting more fluent with accuracy, like in reading rate over the summer, then that's going to help her. That'll help her improve with comprehension. And so then go back in the fall if she's having those issues, and go back to the teacher in the school to say, what are you doing? Because I just feel like my child needs that intervention to be able to. I just suspect that there's these gaps in her foundational skills that I really want you to be able to tell me, like, what are these discrete skills that my child needs help in? Because we're unfortunately, certain systems that we have in place, like with like what they're going to call leveled readers, are not accurately telling teachers or parents, like there's a child that looks like they're reading actually even above grade level, but they still may have trouble reading some CVC word, like what we call basic, like consonant, vowel, consonant words, like, you know, not saying cat, but there are some gaps there, even for a kid who's reading. And my children who are readers, they will put the emphasis on the wrong syllable because there are some gaps in their foundational skills. Even they were able to still learn how to read without having like a real strong structured literacy background, but they still have, I can see that those gaps happen because when they're encountering those academic words and they're putting the wrong emphasis on those words, I'm like, mom's giving them a quick phonics lesson real quick, and then they're like, okay, mom, but they're being really cute about it. They're like, okay, let's do this, mom, let's go.
Yeah, great.
I would say another
yeah, go ahead.
Though is also 7th and 8th grade. I'm developing my personality. I want to be my own person and all of the things. I remember when my baby was 7th, 8th grade, we went on a journey to find the book. And it really was, at some point, she just stopped listening to me, completely was like ignoring everything I said. And so I started to read books out loud that I thought maybe would. We eventually got to a book that was about this young girl from Oakland. That's very rare, just so we're clear. But it was the book. And then that author was the author. So once we got to a book, then we were like, okay, let's find any book she wrote. And I think 2 mistakes I made early on, I wasn't a teacher at that time, was one, the judgment of no, you got that word wrong. Are you right? Please don't. Like, that's not what this is about as a parent. I just want you to read. So like the judgment that comes with, go back and read that over. That's not like, don't do that. Like, there's a part of me being an older reader who may be struggling a little bit, where my efficacy, my love of a thing, my just doing a thing is the thing. And then the second, I think, mistake I made as a mom early on was the telling her the thing I should have told the teacher. They need to be working with you more on a thing. I'm saying it to myself. I'm not trying to judge my baby. I really wasn't. But later, now she's older, so she can have a conversation with me. She's like, you're the reason why I shut down. I really wasn't, though. I just want to say. But I played a role in it. So just as much as we can, just allow the space to be the space. What was that? Say that again. Like, I just want to be involved in, like, celebrate wins.
Great. And that will lead us to our last audience question, and then we'll wrap it up. So how does a parent establish a reading routine if you've never done so before? So like, how, helping at home with that structure, is there a way to, get a routine going?
I'd like
to go ahead, John.
Oh, okay. I'd like to speak on this, but for me, it's more like specific strategies that I've come across. I think making sure that there's time for reading, like saying, this is your bedtime, and then half an hour before your bedtime, you're going to turn off your phone and you're going to read a book. If they have a younger brother or sister, asking them to read to the younger brother or sister, having some sort of book that you are reading as a family, right? Like hey, we're in the car for 30 minutes on our way to this thing, let's pop on, Harry Potter or whatever it is. So I think, Molly, you're probably going to be able to give a more holistic response, but those are some of the strategies that I think are helpful.
Great.
The only other thing I was going to say is just make it like be involved in it yourself. Like I know for myself, if I'm saying like go read a book and I'm like scrolling on my Twitter, like it doesn't come off right, so and there's studies that show like one of the biggest predictors of readers is seeing your parents read books, on their own for pleasure. And so make sure we're not just asking our kids to have a love of reading, but we're also modeling and getting to enjoy our own, love of reading as well, around them. And so if it's their reading time, it can be our reading time too. And, with a Kindle or, Libby or, just a regular old book or newspaper even.
Molly, you actually did mention, and I think Sean, you mentioned this earlier as well, is I would really suggest, if you're up for it, because like you said, you reading is super important as a model of continued literacy. But if you're up for it, trying to take an interest in the same books that your student is interested in, because then you guys can kind of like gossip about, what do you think is going to happen in the next chapter, or like, who's your favorite character? This is my favorite character. And it just gives you a totally different insight, as well as lending a legitimacy to what they're reading. I know personally, I always find it super intimidating when I'm trying to talk to some colleagues about like what I'm reading, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm reading this book about how we're all made from starlight and that and the effect that has on the geopolitical climate." And I'm like, "Oh cool, I'm reading A Wrinkle in Time." But if I see that my mom or my dad is reading the same book as me, I think that really like validates that what they're reading is valid, which it is, because it always is.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is about building those relationships through reading. Like these are shared, it's storytelling. This is why literature is such an important tool in our culture, to be able to build bridges and connections, right, with each other. And so in our desire to be able to just continue to keep that relationship strong with our kiddos that are becoming young adults, is that we want to make sure that it can be, it's that shared rich experience that we have with each other. And so it doesn't have, I mean, if it's not fiction literature, it could be something that you read where it's like something through like an article about someone's experience. Like there's NPR has these great story tidbits where it's like about someone's life experience. I'm blanking on the name of them like quick memoirs that they are, so someone can jump in if they remember. But it's like, what did you think about that story? Like, that's so fascinating. And it's like you said about the goss, let's just put the tea together. Let's put it together, where you're like, what did you think about that? Like, I can't believe that happened to that person, and that building that same experience together. And there was actually during the pandemic a fun news podcast that would come on and make it like, and my girls were a little younger by then, but like we'd be like, oh my goodness, this happened in the news today. My goodness, it's blowing my mind. Like, and like once your kid gets older, it's about like, my child, she's really concerned about the environment. And so she and I, we're having dinner time conversations or nighttime conversations about like, why are we spending money and time on this when we need to create and help the, like the environment? Like, and so like, listen for those opportunities for what you can be building in as reading opportunities, because just talking about and building that is going to be just gold for what can like be a rich literate experience for your child. And it may not look traditional, because then it could be through song, because music is another aspect of how you bring like let's read the lyrics to this song. Oh, like one of my daughters was at a cast party for a musical, and she's like, we sing California Girls, and mom, some of those lyrics, I don't think I should have been singing that, mom. And she's like kind of a modest 7th grader. So I was like, she read it on the karaoke screen. So it's just one of those things where just listen, like if you're listening for what your child like is really interested in, if music or poetry is another great way. And I was just thinking about like going to like live poetry readings, or like authors that come and talk about their books. It's a great way to like learn about why they wrote the book. And we have a lot of like great bookstores that have those authors that come and visit, that just hook you in because you're like, not only is it a great story, but now I know why this person wrote this. And there's YouTube videos for authors too that you can kind of have your, you can sit and like, why did the author write this? This is so creative. I don't know how they did it, So that like building that relationship with your child through that like shared literature experiences, reading experiences, going to be really helpful.
Great, great. We are a little over time, so I do want to wrap it up, but I want to thank our panelists and everyone for joining us today. I really appreciated the conversation and the opportunity to hear everyone's perspectives and thoughts. It got my brain churning. And I want to just make sure to join us for our next literacy session, which is going to be next Thursday on May 25th at 5 p.m. Chanmi will be joining us for that one as well, where we'll be exploring the science of reading, which is a research-based scientific process for effective reading instruction. And the RCP we put in the chat, but we also have it on here as well. So I want to thank you all for being here and have a really wonderful evening.